Well, the Cowboys secondary took a bit of a hit midway through the season after losing both Jourdan Lewis and Anthony Brown to injuries. Now, there's good news and there's bad news. This is Building the Board, and we're going to break it down for you right now. I'm Hailey Sutton, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in Patrik Walker pretty early in this one because we got a lot to talk about. Patrik, that secondary spot, specifically at the cornerback position, was a little rocky midway through, especially after losing Jourdan Lewis and Anthony Brown. You call on Kelvin Joseph to step up. Maybe didn't meet expectations, but here's that good news I was just talking about. You have DaRon Bland with a sneaky good season sneaking in there at the end. My question for you, Patrik, how do you tackle this position going into the draft?
Well, the Cowboys made sure to tackle it first and foremost by going out and getting former multi-time Pro Bowler Stephone Gilmore, former NFL Defensive Player of the Year. Drop him right opposite Trevon Diggs, and you talk about who else we got on the board? DaRon Bland. He led the team in interceptions just last season as a rookie 5th-round pick. What an absolute steal. His initials are not DB for no reason. It's because he was born to be a defensive back. Jourdan Lewis, I spoke with him recently. He's out of the boot. He's off of the scooter. He looks to be ready for training camp. We'll see if he starts on PUP or not, but he will be ready as long as there is no setback. So when you talk about Trevon Diggs, the addition of Stephone Gilmore, return of Jourdan Lewis, DaRon Bland taking another step forward, those 4 spots, the Cowboys have a robust depth chart, which is something they lacked when they lost Anthony Brown and Jourdan Lewis both to injury last season. Kelvin Joseph did not perform up to expectations. It became more of a tryout on the back end of the season. You don't want to see that when you're trying to make a playoff run.
Sure, and I think that this position group is one of the most interesting ones in my opinion because you look at what you have going into this season. You want to win, obviously, now, right? But when you look ahead to the future, you've got Trevon Diggs coming up on a contract year, right? You only have Stephone Gilmore for just that little bit of time as of right now, right? So when you go into this draft, is this something to where the Cowboys should be looking into the future, or do we bring in a guy to kind of secure that depth that you mentioned?
You're going to have to look into the future for that position when you talk about the Cowboys. Trevon Diggs, as you mentioned, he's up for another contract extension. You don't have Stephone Gilmore for the long term. It's more so a Brandon Cooks type situation. Come in, win now, and then hope to figure it out after the fact. DaRon Bland, good news, rookie contract. Jourdan Lewis, not so much. So you have some future issues that you want to address. That's why you look at what is now a robust cornerback position in the NFL draft upcoming. Talk about guys like Joey Porter Jr., Christian Gonzalez. You're not going to have a shot at him, but the good news is below him, you have several opportunities to get an impact guy who can step in and maybe be your DaRon Bland in 2023. If not then, as soon as 2024.
All right, well, obviously the Cowboys have that 26th pick. Will it be a corner? Let's bring in our very own draft show host, Kyle Youmans, to break down some of these cornerbacks we should be keeping our eye on.
Guys, this one is a little extra fun because this is my favorite position group in the entire 2023 NFL draft. I think this cornerback group has everything you need. It's got the top-heavy talent. It has the mid-round gems. It's got the late-round surprises that you could add to your roster. And the Cowboys are in a great spot. You mentioned the addition of Stephone Gilmore, of course, DaRon Bland last year. Adding him to the fold was certainly an added plus for this Cowboys team. But in the secondary, you can always use some extra help. And the Cowboys could maybe even do it as early as the 2nd round, or if one of those top guys falls late in the 1st round. Let's talk about a 2nd-round prospect, though. Emmanuel Forbes out of Mississippi State. He has some great aspects to his game. He has a high ceiling as a ball-hawking corner. 6'1". This is where things kind of get dicey for Emmanuel Forbes. 166 pounds. If you compare that to the cornerback position in the NFL Combine, that puts him at the 0 percentile. One of the lightest corners in the history of the scouting combine ever to be recorded. But then you turn around, you look at the production that he had at Mississippi State, 14 interceptions, 5 of those 14 were returned for touchdowns in what he calls the Forbes list, a list of guys that he's intercepted. And if you've had an interception returned for a touchdown, he puts a little star next to that name on the Forbes list. We'll take a look at a couple of the ways that he impacts the game. First off, despite being 166 pounds, he shows off as a nice run defender off the edge, which I really like. I want to see a willingness from my cornerbacks to come up and stop the run. Here he is against Arkansas. Look at this. He comes out of the frame. That's him right there, number 13, right there laying on the ground. Kind of have to try and keep up with him because he's all over the place. But he comes right here, shoots the knees of this Arkansas running back, and he creates a tackle right at the line of scrimmage. Really no gain whatsoever. Later in the season, he did the same thing. This time he's actually coming from the outside again, but you can actually see him on your screen a little bit down here in the corner against Alabama. This is Jahmyr Gibbs that's running this direction. Not so fast because coming off of a block, back that up just a little bit. Back that up. You, of course, see it right here. He's getting blocked on the outside, but he sheds a block, navigates his way through traffic, and makes a solid tackle. 166 pounds, and he lays a shoulder into a first-round graded running back like that, bringing him to the ground. Sign me up, because that's something that this Cowboys secondary has certainly needed from their corners these last couple of years. Now, what can he do in coverage? Well, we talked about the way that he does make plays on the football. 14 interceptions. He had 3 pick sixes in his final season in Starkville with Mississippi State. Here he is playing close to the line of scrimmage. He actually loses this battle at the line of scrimmage, which is a big reason why he actually allowed 14 touchdowns to go along with the 14 interceptions in his career. Look at this. He actually gets blown off the line of scrimmage. This is why he's not a first-round prospect. Yes, he has a high ceiling, but he also takes risks. In this instant, it actually works out because his length, 33-inch arms, goes up, elevates with a 38-inch vertical, and he pulls this football down in the end zone for a huge turnover for Mississippi State. And this wasn't the only time this showed up on film, because he actually loses at the line of scrimmage, comes back, and makes a play. But what about his big play ability? Against Kentucky, he showed that because it doesn't take long for him to make an impact. Look at this. We're going to play this at full speed. Not even going to break it down. Boom, there he is, off to the races. It's almost like they handed the ball to him. He reads the ball very well out of the quarterback's hands, and then he's off to the races. He ran a 4.35 at the NFL Combine. I mentioned the 33-inch arms, some of the best in the NFL in the cornerback class here in 2023. And then a 38-inch vertical. If it wasn't for the size and it wasn't for the risk-taking, he might be a top 10 prospect in this draft, up there with Christian Gonzalez from Oregon, Devin Witherspoon from Illinois, Joey Porter Jr. from Penn State. Instead, he's kind of in that second tier, which might be perfect for where the Cowboys want to select a cornerback.
You took the words right out of my mouth. To me, that kind of sounds like the recipe for what the Cowboys are looking for in a cornerback, especially when you go back to what we talked about initially, right? Just building on that depth that they really already have. This cornerback room could be scary going into 2023.
Absolutely, it could. And when you talk about, you know, the players that you could grab after day one, you're talking about a guy like Emmanuel Forbes. You're talking about a guy like Kelee Ringo out of Georgia, who arguably is a boom and bust pick as well, but a little bit safer, as Kyle and I discussed offline. Kelee Ringo, he will give you the big plays, but he might give up the big plays as well. But that's where development comes in, and I'd love to have either him or Forbes or any one of these guys tandem with Dan Quinn and Al Harris, the defensive backs coach, and to really see what they can grow into, because as it's been shown between Harris and Quinn and just that defensive unit here in Dallas as a coaching staff, they've been shown that they can develop. Just ask DeRon Bland.
And it's really interesting because this Cowboys coaching staff, this defensive coaching staff, specifically Dan Quinn, it's been known that they have a type. They like long, lengthy, athletic corners. They've got a type that they like to go grab. There's a couple of them, guys that can move in. They're even looking at Brian Branch from Alabama, who's a safety. They look at him as a corner, and I think they would actually put him at the cornerback spot. So at 26, he's a first-round graded player. That could maybe be a possibility if you wanted to continue to add to that cornerback room. But later in the draft, you mentioned Nahshon Wright. Rajon Wright, his little brother, is in this draft class coming out of Oregon State, and he's much more polished than Nahshon was at one point when he was coming out, and he ended up being a top 100 pick as well. So keep an eye on some of those mid to late round corners that have the traits, because if they don't go corner early, they don't go get one of those top guys or a Brian Branch from Alabama, or like we just talked about with Emmanuel Forbes, late round corner is always a secure pick to make, especially whenever you can try and hope for some upside like they did last year with one DeRon Bland.
And TCU fans, we haven't forgotten about you in the cornerback room. Trey Hodges-Tomlinson, he's on the radar as well.
I love that you brought up Rajon. I had a chance to talk to him at the Combine earlier this year, and we have a story coming, so stick with us for that. But my favorite thing that he said when I asked him, you know, what's it like training with your brother? He's already here, and he literally said, I'm better.
Ooh.
Period, point blank, said I'm better. So something interesting to keep in mind. It could be interesting to have a couple of brothers on the list, but you mentioned having a type as well, just sticking with the Wright brothers, Israel Mukuamu as well. Those are guys who Dan really likes to shift around a little bit. So it kind of sounds like in this cornerback class, there's a lot of guys who can move in and kind of mix around, so to speak.
And that's great. That's what the Cowboys are going to look for because, again, you're all set on one side with Trevon Diggs. You're all set on the other side with Stephone Gilmore. And between Jordan Lewis and DaRon Bland at the slot, rotating at the nickel, you're all set. The question now is who can come in behind those guys and play some flex and try to use that time to develop.
I think it'll be interesting because this cornerback class is so deep. They're going to utilize those later picks to maybe continue to bolster that part of the secondary because you saw it last year when injuries come into play.
Yeah.
It always helps to have some bodies handy, especially ones that you can count on late in the year.
You can never have too much depth. Guys, thank you so much. That'll do it for what you need to know about the cornerbacks. But we'll be back on Building the Board to break down even more of these positions as we count down to the draft. We'll see you next time.